Welcome to the Tara Palmeri Show. We have a very special guest beaming into us from The Hague at the NATO summit, where President Trump is dropping down, may have already landed. We have Sir Richard Dearlove, who was the head of the British Spy Agency MI6 during the invasion in Iraq. Such a pleasure to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, Tara. Anyway.
So you've been here. So you've been at The Hague in Netherlands for a few days now, right? You've kind of been talking to everyone on the ground. What is everyone saying privately? I know they want to have a very controlled summit, tight with their communique. Everyone is in alliance in the NATO. But what do they really think about the past, since Saturday night? What do they think about the past 3 days and what's transpired in the Middle East?
Well, I think there's shock. I think there's surprise. I think people are impressed by the exhibition of raw power. I think people are trying to draw parallels with past events. Look, it's very early days, and to give you a sort of clear summary and say this, I think it's too soon. But what I would say is that history doesn't repeat itself, but it sometimes rhymes. And at the moment, I wouldn't draw a parallel, for example, with events in Iraq and events in Iran now. I think we're dealing with two very, very different problems, and I think the events surrounding them are incredibly different as well.
How so?
Well, that's a complicated question. I think the issues are just completely different. And we have a clear problem which has very deep historical long-term roots. I mean, I left office in MI6 a long time ago, although I've continued to be closely involved in geopolitics as a talking head. But the Iranian nuclear program was a huge concern back almost at the same time as Iraq. I'm on record when we were talking about proliferation issues. I said perhaps unwisely, but I meant it at the time, and this must have been before the invasion of Iraq. Right issue, wrong country. And I meant that as a reference to Iran, not Iraq, all that time ago. So we have been worrying about Iran's progress towards nuclear weapons program, and we have used many means to try to slow it down, to stop it, to frustrate it, and it's taken a hell of a long time, excuse my language, but it's now come to a head. And I think that the ultimate issue of attacking it probably was unfortunately a necessary step to take geopolitically.
Oh, so you do think it was a necessary step to take, and you think President Trump did the right thing?
I would have, yes. I would have. I've been supportive of taking this ultimate step. Now, what the attack has achieved, it's difficult to say. It certainly will have massively frustrated the program. And it may have created the preconditions for Iran eventually to give up its nuclear ambitions. But it's too early, I think, to make that clear-cut judgment. Whatever's happened, I don't know how much your listeners know about centrifuge technology, but to have a successful centrifuge center for refining uranium to the level of fissile material for a weapon, these centers have to be incredibly sensitive. The centrifuges have to be tuned. The cascades have to be tuned. They're like grand pianos. And the moment it's disrupted, the disruption is really, really serious. So,
and you think that this disruption was serious enough to
I
have
think
these
it's serious
bombs?
enough to have probably stopped the refinement of uranium for a pretty long period of time, if not indefinitely. But We just don't know yet.
And do you think that is reflective in the way that Iran kind of barely attacked back, called Washington and said, hey, we're going to drop some bombs on a base in Qatar, but we're going to give you a heads up, let you know it's a show of force for politically at home, but we're ready to come to the table and the 12-day war will be over. Is that a sign to you that they really...
are they ready to come to the table? I don't know. That would be a big step forward if they do come back to the negotiating table, because there's nothing to negotiate. The only outcome of the negotiation is to give up the program, because I don't think anyone accepts less than that. I mean, I'm very skeptical about negotiating with Iran on this issue, because negotiations in the past haven't really been effective, and the Iranians have always found a way around them and have sort of manipulated negotiations in their favor. So we just don't know yet what the destination for these events is going to be. But in my book, it has improved the prospects massively of demolishing Iranian power and influence in the Middle East and making it possible maybe for a different outcome. I know a lot of people disagree with that, but I'm absolutely sure this is a sensible step to have taken.
Interesting. So you think that they still wouldn't want to have a conversation, even though they have nothing to really hide anymore? And you think that they're...
Well, I think the concern is, look, they might have removed some of the refined uranium to a different site. This has already been discussed. They may have a further site that the West, that Israel doesn't know about, where they could continue to refine small quantities that they had already exported from the 4-day site. We just don't know. And of course, in my book, the Iranians have a very good record of cheating on agreements, and they're quite effective at doing it. But if there's now a negotiation, the negotiation I think will be extremely hard-nosed. They don't actually need a civilian nuclear program because of the fact that the country has sufficient energy wealth to manage without it. And I think the only real solution to this probably is that it's abandoned completely. But the trouble with that is that I think the identity of the theocracy is tied up with the existence of this program. So one's probably, if one's looking at no program, one is eventually looking at a different regime. That's my own feeling about Iran.
How much uranium do you think is left? Enriched uranium, that is.
How much is there?
Like, how much do you think is left over in the country? I know that you said there's a possibility that they moved it, but I don't know, based on your intelligence or what you're
I don't know.
gathering.
I mean, I'm following the press in this. I've got no inside knowledge. And, what I'm saying is that there were published quantities which aren't very large, but probably enough. But they would have to be re-refined. The level, I think they've reached 60% purity. The general view is you need to reach 90% purity. So they've still got to move them to another centrifuge in order to do that. And maybe there's a secret base elsewhere. Look, my own feeling is that we have seen an extraordinary performance by Israeli intelligence in terms of their knowledge about the program. And if their knowledge about the program is so extensive, I find it difficult to accept that they haven't got a complete picture, and that if there is somewhere else, the Israelis would know about it. And I think if the Israelis would know about it, the Israelis would be talking about it, the base would be identified. So I think these concerns are natural because no one's quite sure what the outcome of the attack has been. But I think it's probably very extensive and has, for the time being, stopped the program.
So Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying for a little more than 20 years that Iran has about 3 months to build a nuclear bomb, right? Since 1996, came to Congress almost every year. He has come back, or every other year, and he's come and he said, Iran can build a bomb in 3 months. They're going to build a bomb in 3 months. Iran has, 3 months to build a nuclear bomb. What do we make about that? Is he the boy who cried wolf, or has this been true all along and there is some sort of intelligence that gave them, a real reason to come in? Or is it just that, Iran looks weak, this is the best time to strike?
Well, I haven't seen the Israeli intelligence, but my own guess would be that the Iranians were getting close to weaponization. And I think that...
Because you've worked with Bibi Netanyahu before, right? You trust this intelligence?
Well, look, he is a very tough, difficult leader of Israel. And I think one should look at it through the optic of Israel, not necessarily Netanyahu's character. And my experience of dealing with the Israelis, I don't want to go into too much detail. All I would say is that when the security of the state is threatened significantly, the Israelis will act very assertively in their national interest and not take much account of anybody else's views. And that is Israel as it is today. I think the other thing you have to understand is that Khamenei, the supreme leader, must be nearing the end of his life. I think he has an ambition, or had an ambition, or has an ambition to see Iran very close to weaponization. And I think the circumstantial evidence that I have read and seen points to Iran being pretty close to weaponization. I'm not going to, as it were, discuss the number of angels on a pinhead. Maybe that's an unfortunate simile. But, 3 weeks, 10 days, 3 months, 4 months, they were getting close, no question in my mind.
Yeah. I mean, it does sound, though, that if it's someone who's persistently said that they're an existential threat, how much can you really rely on their intelligence if they've been saying it for over 20 years?
Look, the Iranian regime has identified itself by what it's supposed to, not what it does for its population. And Khamenei before him have been preaching the destruction of Israel and, of course, opposition to the great Satan, the United States. And that's the character of the regime. They could have easily, as it were, adopted a more constructive attitude in terms of international security. But I think the Iranians, because of their, I shouldn't say that, I should have said this Iranian regime, because of its progress down this one-way street, has, as it were, brought it to an inevitable destination. And I don't think it was sensible any longer for the West to stand by and allow this crisis to continue to build.
Right. At the same time, though, Iran has been celebrating death to America since 1979. They've been making threats towards America for so long. I mean, are they a paper tiger?
They certainly weren't a paper tiger, because look at the way that they built the axis of resistance. Once they had signed the JCPOA, which was the previous agreement that you will be aware of to control their nuclear program, supposedly, they took that as a laissez-passer to build the axis of resistance across the Middle East. And they have, as it were, conducted grey warfare through proxies and destabilized the Middle East massively. Obviously, we're talking about Hezbollah, we're talking about Hamas, we're talking about the Houthis. The Houthis are slightly different capability from the other two, but they have been the main destabilizer politically of the Middle East. And the situation was getting worse and worse. And the IRGC, the Quds Force of the IRGC, was the means through which they conducted arms-length warfare. They had hollowed out the state of Lebanon. They had, as it were, a controlling relationship with the Assad regime in Syria to an extent. I just don't think, looking across the Middle East, there was any prospect of a better security situation whilst this Iranian regime remained in place.
Got it. So what should we make of the counterattack in the early hours on Tel Aviv last night, on Israel? I believe it was Tel Aviv, the region. Did Iran already break the ceasefire?
Well, I just don't know enough about this. There seems to be a suggestion that there was only 1 or 2 missiles fired and they might have been in error. Look, I don't know.
Can you fire missiles in error?
Well, you could certainly
after a ceasefire is agreed and there are hours of back and forth.
You could, because look, the command structure in the military has been massively diminished by the Israelis. You could have a local battery or a local commander, who I wouldn't say might disobey, but
freelancing.
Maybe, I think that the fog of war, all sorts of things can happen, and I don't know whether that was a deliberate violation or whether something went wrong in Iran. But as I said...
Or was it a face-saving measure?
Well, it might have been a face-saving measure. And of course, as I said, look, when the Israelis then are provoked and they deal with their own security autonomously without reference to anybody else, they're not going to say, oh, hang on, Trump told us that we couldn't riposte. That they don't think and act like that. That's not exactly what's going to happen. And okay, I saw that little clip of Trump's fury as he climbed on the helicopter and used an epithet which wasn't very gracious for a head of state. But that's dealing with Israel. I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah, right. I mean, they are supposed to be our greatest ally, but they sort of drag Trump into this with very little input.
That's the sort of narrative that we've got at the moment, that Netanyahu dragged Trump into this. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I mean, the one thing that we don't really understand very often is the way that Trump's mind works. And
we do know that America first was his, core tenet, principal belief, and that is what he ran on.
Yes, but look, I did a podcast several months ago with Mike Lawler, who is
Congressman
from New York,
Republican. Yep,
and he's on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and he was pretty adamant that we were on a track, or the United States was on a track to bomb Iran's nuclear capability. I think that this has been on the agenda of, let's say, some of the people in Trump's administration. And I don't think, personally, that Netanyahu has the capability politically to drag the United States in against its will. I think this was a decision taken amongst a group of people within the Trump administration who probably would be expressing views to the ones I'm expressing to you in this podcast.
Yeah. I mean, the press has been very positive for President Trump today.
Yeah.
Basically, the impression that...
I think this is a big shift in international security. And despite the uncertainty, I think the outcome is likely to be positive in the medium to longer term. And I know that there will be people who are worried, who will disagree with me, who will talk about Iraq, who will talk about, the fog of war, not knowing what the consequences are going to be. But the fundamental fact is that we may be close to seeing the end of the Iranian nuclear weapons program. And if that's the case, that's a huge plus for the international community.
So you think when you talk to people at NATO, at the summit in The Hague, where you are right now, they're actually optimistic?
I couldn't answer that question honestly because I haven't talked to enough people to solicit their view. So I don't.
Do you tend to feel like you congregate with like-minded people there as well?
Well, I think there'll be quite a lot of people here who agree with me. I mean, people who've known about this. Look, those of us who've had knowledge of this program, who've had knowledge of what's been going on, to understand how it started and the Iranian intentions, the behavior of the IRGC, I mean, all the other aspects to this. It's got such deep roots. It's got such a long history. This is not some, flash in the pan that's just happened. This crisis has been running for more than 20 years.
Right. Yeah. Well, Sir Richard, we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Any last thoughts to an American audience that is political junkies, but maybe not as, perhaps not as
well, I think one of the issues
on the program.
I've talked in a quite assertive manner about Iran. And I think just to comment more generally on Trump and the sort of Trump phenomenon, and I'm not talking about him personally, I'm talking about the United States foreign policy as expressed through his administration. Three things have happened. So we have a reset of policy on China, which is still ongoing, and we're not sure how that's going to play out. But I think that was necessary. And I think that rethinking our security relationship with China, and I mean the West generally, is really important. And Trump has set that in motion. Where we end up, I'm not sure. Then the whole question of the Middle East, which we've discussed. Then the whole issue of NATO. And I think the resetting of NATO's agenda, forcing European countries to increase their contribution, to spend, up to 5% of GDP, 3.5 initially, maybe going up to 5.
Over a decade.
Over a decade, yep. That's probably not fast enough, and it's long overdue. And I've always said, why on earth, should the American taxpayer be paying for the security and defense of Europe? It's completely anomalous. And we've got a number of laggard countries in Europe who are way behind the curve. And I think that this summit, as it's playing out, is going to be very important in sort of resetting NATO as an effective security alliance. And I very much hope that, Trump does not now diminish his involvement or diminish his sort of strategic leadership of NATO. And the other point, but I think I'm very concerned about this is maybe on a more negative side, is I don't understand why the Trump administration doesn't understand the connection between, Putin's Russia, China, Taiwan. All of these issues are interconnected. So you can't treat Ukraine as a separate issue to be treated differently. And that's my major security concern at the moment, despite the positives I've expressed, the particular positive being, I think, what's happened in Iran over the last few days.
Right. And now China will have easier access to energy coming from Iran as well. They're all intertwined.
They're all intertwined. These issues can't be treated as separate security issues. They have to be looked at holistically. And I don't think at the moment I see the evidence of that being done sufficiently in this administration, despite some of its achievements.
So maybe Marco Rubio has too many jobs.
Well, I think Marco Rubio, if I was talking to him one-to-one, and I've done a podcast with him, almost certainly agrees with me.
Right. Yeah, he is the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of State. I believe he also runs the National Archives. Quite a lot of jobs. But
I know, but I mean, this issue is probably the one that should be at the forefront of his mind. And I hope he's listening to me. And if he is, I invite him to have a conversation with me about it.
Oh, well, I'm sure he's going to be at the Hague, so if you can
he
corner him.
He probably is. I haven't seen him yet.
You can corner him. Well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
And have a great time. And ping us if, you hear anything interesting.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tara. You. All the best.
Have a great
Good talking to you.
Thanks for watching the Tara Palmeri Show. I want to thank my producer, Eric Aminate, my booker, Jane Fusco, my team of researchers and social media. That's Abby Baker, Luke Radel, and Sarah Carney. I'll be back again this week, but you can always find my reporting by going to tarapalmeri.com. That's TARAPALMERI.com, and signing up for my newsletter, The Red Letter, where you will get my exclusive reporting straight to your inbox. See you again soon.